Let's go ahead and pray. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for giving us the time to learn your word so that we may incorporate it into our lives every day, so that we may not do our will but your will, that we may be a light in this darkened world, and that we may change it for the better. In your name we pray. Amen. Oh, George just sat down. Thank you. So I am going to continue today's second lesson. It's on page 75 about family conflict and the things we can learn about the relationships we have within our family. Today's lesson is on Abram and Lot. But before we talk about that, I want to go back in time. Last week, was everyone here last week?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, most of us were? Okay. I want to read just part of last week's lesson because I thought it was so important. I'm going to go back to page 70 and 72 and just read part of it because it really struck me. No one has a perfect family. We all have struggles within our families. And I think the lessons we learn about, especially here in Genesis, can help us deal with our family members and give us patience and wisdom to deal with it. I'm on page 70. I'm just going to read part of this again. We're talking about Cain and Abel. So Cain and Abel were brothers who were different from each other. Abel worshiped God through sacrifice, offering the best of his flock, but Cain came to God in his own way. The Lord did not regard Cain and his worship. We see that Cain's response was anger and rage. Anger robs us of our kindness, care, and love we should have for our families. Anger distracts us from productivity, purpose, and peace in our relationships. Ultimately, a heart that harbors anger towards someone reflects a heart that is not right with God. To me, that strikes me very good. So remember that when you're dealing with your family. Even still, God came to Cain in mercy and asked questions to help Cain find understanding and repentance. Instead of confessing his sin and offering a sacrifice, Cain let sin reign. He remained angry and unrepentant. It's a very good lesson. I got one more part I want to read, which I thought was important. After Cain murdered his brother, the Lord gave him another opportunity to confess and repent by asking him, "Where is your brother Abel?" But instead of confession, Cain lied and offered a snide remark, "I don't know. Am I my brother's guardian?" People often try to avoid a direct answer when they are caught in a lie. Did Cain think he could outwit the Lord? That seems kind of unreasonable, but do we do it ourselves? Do we also try to outwit the person we're talking to? The Lord gave Cain yet another opportunity to confess his sin. But instead of drawing close to the Lord, Cain only complained about his degree of punishment. Sounds familiar? His downfall began when he changed the focus of his worship from a sacrifice to the pleasant display of his own handiwork. It was there when the progressions of sin began crouching at the door. Verse 7. Cain went it his own way and refused to obey what God required. The Apostle John said Cain killed Abel because his deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous. That was in 1 John. His evil deeds began by worshiping God his own way, on his own terms, which ultimately led to death. Cain's hatred cut short the life and career of his brother, and it cost Cain his own career and a lifetime in exile. Romans 12 tells us, "Love one another deeply as brothers and sisters." There are dire and long-lasting consequences when we do not act as our brother's keeper. That hit me so hard. It's obviously very direct, but it's very hard to love someone who's mean to you, someone who's rude to you, someone who takes issue with you, and especially if they're your family member too. Just there's things that we have to learn. So let's go to our lesson today. Page 75, please. Abraham, excuse me if I say Abraham. Abraham and Lot, family rights. The point, trust God when challenged over your rights or possessions. Has anyone read this lesson? John, did you just read it? Has anyone else got a preview of it? Okay. All right, we're going to talk about possessions today. The Bible meets life. Open almost any source of social media, new media or traditional media, and you'll find a platform awash in conflict, debate, and one-upmanship, especially during an election year like this one. It seems that civil discourse and listening have become a lost art. Isn't that true? Yeah, we could go anywhere. Everyone's got something to say and no one's going to listen to them. And I'm not that old. I'm not trying to be rude, but I mean, I'm slowly, as I age, discovering how we as humans interact. We do not listen. It's almost like we refuse to listen to someone who has a different opinion. I mean, in politics, in relationships, in anything, sports, whatever. If you don't agree with me, I'm not even going to listen to you. Why have we gotten to that point?
It's not a discussion anymore. It's just my view and you have your view and that's it.
Right. Why? I almost want to, and this is kind of rude, and it's kind of, I almost want to like have a volume button and say, okay, you talk and I'll hit my volume button and I won't say a word, even if I disagree with you. And then you talk, or then I'll talk and you listen to me. Because it's like we've lost the inherent ability to just be quiet, even when we want to listen to someone, but we have to tell them that they're wrong when they're talking. You know, why are we that bad now? I don't. Is it social media? Is that part of it? I mean, is it we have to blurb out what we think is right, and who cares what anyone else thinks?
I think it's social media. It's cell phones. We've lost the ability to talk to one another.
To talk, yeah.
Face to face.
Yeah. I don't know if my grandpa or someone said this is like, you can have a heated argument or whatever, because my grandparents used to, but then at the end of the day, you still love each other and you ate food with each other, but you disagreed over ideas. You didn't disagree over, I don't know, what's the right word? You didn't hate the person because they viewed the world slightly different than you.
You agreed to disagree.
You agree, right, you agreed to disagree. And obviously, politics was one of them, but I'm sure a lot of things back then. But as a kid, I just saw them disagree, but they still sat down and they ate food and they talked and they laughed and they played games. Well, it's like we can't do that anymore. We disagree and we walk away from the person, and then we're like, they're our enemy. We don't even want to associate with them. But here's the problem: they're your own family. What are you supposed to do if they're your aunt, your uncle, your cousin, your parents? Your children?
That's why I'm not on any kind of social media at all.
Right.
Facebook, Instagram, whatever you call the other ones.
Yeah,
I'm not on any of them because I've heard the horror stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want no part of it.
It is I think I try to explain to people, I try to educate people, it's a platform that doesn't allow you to have a conversation and a disagreement. You throw up, it's like a billboard. You throw up an idea and then someone can hate it, but they don't have a chance to have a discourse with you because there's no give and take. A conversation, there's give and take. Social media is, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. It's not, well, let's talk about this or let's talk about that. Why do you think that? Well, because of my experience, I lived a life, etc. The young people can learn a lot from the old people. When we have men's Bible study, do you think I'm sleeping? No, I'm listening to Eddie talk about his life. I'm listening to you, John, and anyone else that talks about what it was like when they were younger. Because it's changed. But you can glean so much wisdom from someone who's older than you. And it's amazing that the kids don't want to do that today. They don't want to hear or listen to someone who's older. And that's scary when we cut that off. So let's move on. The saga of Abraham and Lot proves that some things about human nature never change. We've often heard people say, if you don't defend yourself, who will? If you don't defend yourself, who will? It's the bent of self-preservation that often rules the day in relationships. As a family counselor might put it, do you want to be right or do you want to be married? Sometimes being right, being favored, or winning the property line battle is just not worth it. We learn from Scripture that we are to be makers of peace in our personal relationships and families. Often this requires sacrifice. And young people go, what is sacrifice? What is that truly? This takes a Christ-like faith and a charitable trust in God that He will work things out in His way and in His time. Who in your circle really takes competition to the next level? Well, a prime example would be a cousin, aunt, uncle that you're playing cards. I grew up, my mom's family, the card game was Pinochle. And I remember my grandfather was very adamant about playing it right and playing it competitively. And he would call out you when you didn't do a very good job, and that was maybe the German roots in him or something, I don't know, But as a kid, you don't know those things. You just saw Grandpa yelling at people for playing the wrong cards or whatever.
I could never figure it out. I tried to learn to play Pinochle, I could not figure it out.
It actually is easier than you think, but it's basically euchre with a little bit of bidding. It really is kind of like euchre, really, but with more cards and a little bit of bidding. But it's a little complicated at first. Brian, anyone?
Oh, Shelly.
Who's that? We're not trying to name people. Is she competitive? What is she like?
Oh, it's a kind of a thing at any sport event like you can crochet, you gotta do one win. Is it funny?
Yeah. Some people are like that, yeah. Well, a lot of us are like that. I shouldn't say some.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, my dad was that way, super competitive
Super competitive.
in everything.
In everything, yeah.
I mean, him and his brother would play chess
Oh, wow.
all night long.
Okay.
And I got up and go in their kitchen where they were playing on several occasions, and there'd be chess pieces all over the floor. Because one of them got upset and just
Threw it or knocked it or whatever.
threw it, and they separated.
Wow.
Super competitive.
Super competitive at chess. That's a tough game to play too. Wow. All right, let's turn the page. The first Genesis out of 13. Brian, can you read that? Can we hear you? Do you have it? You have it, right?
Yeah. Now Lot, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents. But the land was unable to support them as long as they stayed together. They had so many possessions that they could not stay together. And there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land. So Abram said to Lot, please let's not have a quarreling between you and me, or between you and your herdsmen or my herdsmen, since we are relatives.
Thank you. Before this, in Genesis 12, God promised to bless Abram and give him vast lands, properties, livestock, riches, and his own nation. Abram's offspring would exceed the number of dust or grains of sand. When Abram left for God's promised land, he journeyed with his wife Sarai. Is it Sarai or Sarah?
It's Sarai now.
Sarai.
Sarai.
Yeah, is that, I always wonder, it's pronounced Sarai?
The chicken place.
Yeah, I understand, but they say Sarai. And his nephew Lot. We enter chapter 13, God has blessed Abram and his nephew with riches and livestock. Abram seemed to have it all, except he still had no son, no heir. Perhaps he was tempted to rationalize God's promise of a son and would, at age 75, consider Lot as a sort of surrogate answer to his prayer and God's promise. Once they arrived in Canaan, the Lord blessed Abram and Lot with increasingly large herds and flocks. God intended for Abram to have great wealth and vast lands. God was blessing Abram as he promised. While Abram enjoyed the Lord's blessing of abundance, trouble was brewing. The abundance of livestock for Abram and Lot had overgrown the area's natural resources. The land could no longer sustain the flocks and herds. So the shepherds and herdsmen became frustrated by getting in each other's way as they tended to their responsibilities, causing quarreling amongst the herdsmen. A conflict broke out between the herdsmen of Abram and the herdsmen of Lot. Abram did the right thing by discussing the matter with Lot one-on-one. See Matthew 18, one-on-one. It's an important point to remember. Abram went to his nephew privately. He didn't want his family's argument over having enough land for their possessions to dishonor the Lord in the sight of the local community. During this conflict, the Canaanites and the Perizzites lived in the land and would have witnessed the conflict between Abraham and Lot. Very good point. The conflict resulted from natural circumstances, from the overcrowded conditions, but the Lord used that situation to move forward with his purposeful blessing for Abraham to inherit the promised land. Sometimes disputes or unrest arise so that in our discomfort, we move closer to the plan God has ordained for us. That's what's happened in Abram's conflict with Lot. Their separation moved God's plan of blessing forward for Abram to rely more fully on the Lord to have a son, a rightful heir. Like Abram, believers should go to one another alone and work out their differences. And like Abram, when we discuss our difficulties with the other person, we should follow Abram's example by seeking to restore such a person with a gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you also won't be tempted. Galatians 6. Our blessings may sometimes come through discomfort, but like Abram, we should remain calm and kind. Good point. Question 2. Where do you see possessions causing conflict in today's world? This is, I think, a huge issue going on.
Yeah, the term I've used in the past, and I've heard others use, keeping up with the Joneses.
Exactly.
Oh, this person got a new truck or new car. Oh, I gotta get one better.
Keeping
You know,
up, yes.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Keeping up with the Joneses. And I think sometimes that plays into our being subconsciously.
Yeah.
Because our country and our culture market to us consciously and subconsciously. That's why we have commercials.
Yeah.
That's why we constantly are bombarded with messages of buy. You will be this way. You are not complete until you have this. You're not whole until you have that, etc. It's a good point.
I mean, I get ads, from the dealership that I bought my truck from. I get ads from them all the time. And sometimes like, but I'm like, you know what? I just paid this one off. I'm just gonna keep driving,
Exactly. A good example of that, I can ask every old person in the room, why do I need a new cell phone every year? Do you guys have an answer? Do any of you have an answer? Why would I need a new cell phone every year?
I can't answer
Okay, so, but I need a new one every year. Why do I need a new one every year? If you're, if you're older, you're wondering why. So why are we falling into that trap? Why are so many people buying a new cell phone? I don't want to say every year, but let's just say
Just to be able to say they got the latest.
they got the latest,
I don't have to say that.
the newest gadget, the newest thing. I got a better
It's
gift.
gonna be obsolete in 3 months.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you can't afford it, right? Do you know how much this thing costs? This costs almost as much as the car I drive. Have you seen the car I drive? Isn't it amazing to think that this thing costs almost as much as that white car up there? Well, I got that car from a friend, so it was cheap, and this cost, I'll be honest with you, probably $1,200. And this is 3 years old. So 3 years, I haven't gotten a phone in 3 years. It's paid off. Guess what I can go do? I can go buy a new phone. That was the marketing thing they gave me. They gave me a text not too long ago that said, your phone is now paid off. Would you like to come in and update it or whatever, whatever they say? And I'm like, hey, honey, my phone's paid off. I can go get a new one now.
Why are you still here?
It's just amazing how they can, it's almost like they can just twist little things in our humanness and they can, and it makes it sound good, yeah. And I'm driving to the AT&T thinking I'm gonna get a new phone. No, I'm gonna be in debt for $1,500 again or whatever it is now. I think they're I think the new iPhones, aren't they $1,500 now? Isn't that amazing? $1,500, that's $1,500 for a new iPhone.
I just paid outright.
Do you really? You can just, oh, you can
But
actually
I've
do
never-
that?
Yeah, well, I've never bought an iPhone. I will not pay that much for a phone.
Well, how much does yours cost?
Like 130.
Wow, isn't that amazing? 1/10 the price.
The first one I bought was $100. This, and I don't know what happened to it. It was just starting to act funny, so.
You just buy another
I
one.
had it. I bought another one, and I think that one cost me 130, and I've had it for 2 years now.
Yeah, but can yours do as much as mine?
I don't know.
That's all. That's all.
I don't need it. I
Good.
mean, I make phone calls.
I know. That's the marketing
I
thing.
might look up, stuff for the truck, or, I mean, it does what I want it to.
Right.
But as far as all that other extra stuff, like paying, using my phone to pay for stuff, or, all that's, no. I don't,
It's the old-fashioned.
connecting to my house to turn the lights off and on, or.
Right. They've taken a want that we had, and
Turn the lights off and on with my.
they've taken a human want and created it into a need. So they're pushing it more towards, you need this because this is the way the world is now. You have to do your banking online. Okay, you have to do this. You have, you don't want to do it, you have to do it. It's a need now. It's that marketing that you have to have it or else you can't, and it's amazing how many people buy into that.
That's pretty brilliant when you think of it, because they did what they set out to do.
Yeah. And then that's part of our culture.
They made you think you needed something you don't need.
Well, and then you become a slave to something you just said. You don't, or you might need a basic one, but you don't need a $1,500 one. So now you've spent the money and now you're a slave to, now you got to pay back that company the money that now you owe them. You have to work extra to pay. It's a never-ending cycle that you have to break,
And
yes.
you're ruined for the rest of your life, because now every time you get a new one, it's gotta be at least as good as that one.
Right. Or you think it that, right. Yep. So,
This too with them, what they've really done is got you to the point where you can't go nowhere where they don't know where you're at.
yes.
I remember surveillance 24/7, even in your own home now.
Yeah.
People used to complain about being watched. This was a long time ago when
Yeah,
they talked about this.
Yeah.
It was like, well, you ain't gonna do that, or I'm not gonna allow that, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what, folks?
Yep.
Here we are.
They can track you 24/7.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people at first didn't realize it, but I think, like you're saying, now we do realize it, and it's part of our life. How are we going to live without it? How do you live off the grid?
You've accepted it in your phone so much, or even throughout life, now it's in your vehicle.
Right. It's part of our life, right?
It's part of it. It's like tracking you now all the time.
Right. So that opens a whole other can of worms, as they say.
Most certainly does.
So the next lesson, Genesis 13. Bill, could you read that?
Oh, most certainly. Isn't the whole land before you? Let's see, hold on. Isn't the whole land before you separate from me? If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. Lot looked out and saw that the entire plain of the Jordan was as far as Zoar, was well watered everywhere like the Lord's garden in the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan for himself. Then Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other.
Thank you. Abraham sought a peaceful solution to his problem with his nephew Lot. Seeing that their herdsmen began to quarrel, Abraham took the initiative to resolve the conflict and avoided escalating it. Abraham reasoned with his nephew Lot and discussed their options for parting ways and resettled in opposite directions. Throughout the conversation, Abraham remained direct about the conflict and was diplomatic by seeking a solution rather than dwelling on whose fault it may have been for causing the conflict. It's very important. Abraham was gracious and deferred to Lot, giving him his first choice of land options, which is unusual. Lot jumped at the opportunity to choose first. He chose the Jordan Valley, which was lush and green because it was well watered. There was a notable lack of restraint in Lot. He gave no thought to dividing the lush lands of the plains. The land he chose was easy money, but Lot was short-sighted. He chose profits over protecting his family's future from the evil influences of neighboring Sodom. Instead of Lot deferring to his elder, Abraham, Lot looked out, saw, and took, just like in the Garden of Eden, where Eve saw that the tree was good for food and delightful to look at, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom, so she took some. Genesis. Like Eve in the garden, Lot lived by sight. Although Lot believed in God, he chose to live close to evil. Lot ended up losing everything and lived in caves, which later in the story we'll find out, well, Genesis 19 later. He lost his good name, he lost his wife, his sons-in-laws, and his surviving daughters lost their sense of shame. In today's culture, before purchasing a house, most parents consider the overall neighborhood, the quality of the local school systems, and the crime rate in that area. Did you guys all do that before you moved?
Yeah.
Okay. But it appears Lot gave no thought or concern that he would settle down near Sodom, a city known for its wickedness. He set up his tent near Sodom, and disaster, Genesis 13. Lot positioned his family to be corrupted by their cultural surroundings. Many older pastors have said of this passage that Lot got grass for his cattle, and Abram got grace for his offspring. That took me a while to ponder for a while. That's interesting. Lot got grass for his cattle, and Abram got grace for his offspring. Lot's choices remind us of John's warning to us. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride in one's possessions is not from the Father, but it is from the world. And the world, with its lust, is passing away, but the one who does the will of God remains forever. Perfect wisdom for the time. Although Abram could not could have pulled rank over Lot and claimed the land of his choice, he placed his faith in the will of God, and his inheritance remains forever. Abram followed the Lord by faith and continued in the Lord's blessing. As he aged, his estate grew in properties, cattle, herds, servants, and generational wealth. Throughout this conflict, Abram remained kind and calm. Abram trusted by faith that the Lord was in control. He never stooped to selfish ambition. He showed grace and kindness. Philippians 2 tells us, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look not to his own interests, but rather to the interests of others." That sounds like unconditional love. Abram reminds us to place the needs of others before our own, and that is hard to do. So question 3 goes to, when have you benefited from someone placing your needs before their own? Let me read that question again. When have you benefited from someone placing your needs before their own? So I guess it's saying, when have you benefited when someone else put your needs before them? That's how I'm interpreting the question. I think of like,
always puts my needs before him, and we've had 36 years of a wonderful marriage.
perfect. Yeah, that's a perfect example. In marriage, you almost have to, right?
Should.
I think it'll create a lot of tension. If you've been married for any length of time, you realize real quickly that, yeah. I mean, it's a natural tendency to try to, I'll be honest with you, my wife and I sit down and we communicate a lot and like, okay, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Let's do this. Let's plan out, so that we have an idea of what's going to go on for the day or the week or whatever. And I think it's an eye-opening experience because she'll say things I don't even think of. Oh, that we need to do this, or we have to do this, or, things that are important on her mind. And I think it allows us, in a sense, to view the other person, what they're thinking of. And I encourage other people to do that because I can't read my wife's mind, but she might think, oh, we got to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, no, we got to do this, this, and this. But there's friction when I'm trying to do these 3 things and she's trying to do these, and we're like, well, why aren't you helping me? Or the situation is, so we sit down, and I've learned over time is we sit down and we communicate. We sit down over a meal, we talk about, okay, what are we going to do this weekend? Or when is she going to go to school, and when am I going to do this, and et cetera. And I think it helps because we think we know what's going on in our spouse's lives, but we never do. And it changes too from week to week, and that's why open communication is so much better than assuming. If you assume, you're going to get in trouble. So.
Yeah. There's no saying about assuming.
The one thing I thought of is like your parents. When you're a parent and you have children, let's just say, a lot of times you will put their needs before your needs. I think that's an obvious to a point. I think there's a line where, you have to take care of things, and like you said, you have to work to make money, you have to, instill discipline. But a child's needs, for instance, are, well, especially like in situations where there's danger or something else, you will do what you have to protect your children. I remember when I first took my children swimming. I have 3 daughters. So if they were all in the pool, I was spastic. My wife was like talking away or something. I was like an eagle. I had to have a direct line of sight to every one of my children. Because because this is a public pool, not a private pool. So if some other kid hit them or knocked them or whatever, they're underwater, they could drown. This is the way I'm thinking. They could drown in 5 seconds. They can't, but that's what you're thinking. So I was like the lifeguard standing there watching my 3 kids swim because they're all kind of in different areas. I'm watching, and I couldn't relax because I was so concerned about, because I know water's dangerous, especially if you're a little person and you don't know how to swim very well. So that was one of the things that was very open in my mind. Like I had to watch them exactly so that
You got 3 girls and 2 eyes, you were busy.
I was busy, yeah. Or if we brought another kid with us or something too, it's the same idea. You know, you had to watch them just as well, or even more because it wasn't your child and you were responsible for them. But any other examples you guys can think of? All right, let's go on to the next one. Eddie, do you have a book?
Yeah.
Okay, could you read the last Genesis?
After Lot had separated from him, the Lord said to Abram, look from the place where you are, look north and south, east and west, for I will give you and your offspring wherever all the land that you see. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust of the earth, then your offspring would be counted. Get up and walk around the land through its length and width, for I will give it to you. So I removed his tent and went to live near the oaks of Meraim at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord.
Thank you. To better understand God's promise to Abram, consider God's premise for blessing him. Originally, God told Abram, go from your land and from your relatives, Genesis 12. Lot was a relative, his nephew. God's promise did not seem to include Abram's current relatives. The Lord requires full obedience and full compliance with his commands. Abram was a man of great faith, a spiritual man of great consequences. But when God showed Abram his land and promise, to your offspring I will give this land, verse 7, the Lord did not mention his current relatives. It wasn't until Lot was gone that God showed Abram the full expanse of his blessing. After Lot had separated from him, the Lord said to Abram, look from the place where you are. Look north and south, east and west, for I will give you and your offspring forever all the land that you see. Genesis 13. There is no end date of God's promise to Abram. That's important to remember. He and his offspring were promised this land forever. At this point, Abram had no son, no heir. His only possible surrogate was now gone because of the contentious conflict. Abram trusted the Lord, who promised his offspring would increase in number like the dust of the earth. God told Abram, get up and walk around the land through its length and width, for I will give it to you. Abram reveled his trust in God's promise by moving his tent to another part of the land where he built an altar, verse 18, to worship the Lord. Why is worship such a good response to receiving God's blessings?
If it wasn't for God, we wouldn't have it.
Say that again, Bill.
I said if it wasn't for God, we wouldn't have it.
Okay,
Because of God's blessing,
right.
he was given, and to worship the Lord is recognizing that.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the most direct and common sense kind of thing to do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't get blessings and then just say, ha, look at me. I mean, that's like the worst thing to do, I think.
Take your truck off, thank you, Lord, for giving me the money to do it.
Yeah.
Pay the house off, and you got for, yeah.
Can I ask a personal question? How many of you, when you pray every day, do you thank the Lord for your blessings? Nice, yeah. I mean, I think that's something I've come to, I'm going to be honest, maybe in the last 15 or 20 years. I think when I was younger, I don't think I realized I was blessed so much, I think, I think maybe I was more selfish in some sense, because you're like,
Oh, yeah.
why don't, because when you're younger, I think I think it's a function of age. You're always worried about yourself more. I don't think you're as wise as the older you guys get. I think you now are looking back and you're more experienced. You're young, you're like, why me? Why, even though you might be faith-filled, you're still like, why this, why, you're looking at the negative part of it. Instead of now, I'm like, look at who I am, look at what I've become, look at what I've experienced. And on the way, you've protected me and you've guided me and you've given me so much. Everyone in this room has so much you don't realize. And we need to think, like Pastor says, I mean, if you were living in another country and you're persecuted for just coming together like this, we'd be worried about someone coming in and breaking us up or taking us off to jail or something just because we're talking about Jesus. Yeah, it's a blessing we have in this country.
We went to Andreas' 25th yesterday.
Yeah.
His nephew is from, El Salvador?
Oh, yeah.
He talked to us for a long time, we talked to him, and I said, basically, he did his, confession of being a Christian and everything, but like he said, as bad as this nation is, he said, we're still the best nation on the earth. We still have the most freedoms. And if you stop and think about it, we're in chaotic terms or whatever you want to look at it now, but we're still the best country.
Sure.
Because he was talking about all the what went on where they were at, when he grew up, and what they had to put up with, and what they had to deal with and everything. It's like, none of us have ever had to deal with that. None of us.
Yeah.
And, or other countries were just as bad. So I said, it really we were sitting there listening to him talk and everything, but how much, he's a young man, but he's made a business for himself, and just through work. He worked hard, he studied, but he's thankful for what God's done for him. And he's grown because of it.
Wow.
He's gained prosperity because of it. He started out with nothing. And I think each one of us, at least myself, I have to look at what I've been given and everything over the years, and how for years and years and years I worked long hours and worked longer to make more money, because my thought process was for 30 plus years is the more you make, the more you'll have. I didn't, because I was not a dedicated Christian so much at all. But I can look back now in the last couple of years and see how that I was blessed, but I did not realize it. I did not recognize it. I did not thank the person who was blessing me. I thought it was me. Because I figured, hey, I'm working 12, 14-hour days, I'm making
Right.
money, so it was all what I was doing. And
Yeah.
I realize now it's totally wrong. So I mean, age has a lot to do with it. I also think that by getting closer to God, becoming a better Christian has really enlightened me more on what I've been given, what I've been blessed with. So you talk about your prayers or whatever I pray. I mean, during the day or anytime, I have to thank God for what I've been given. And I mean health, everything. Because without the health, I couldn't work.
Yeah.
So I think every one of us in here, I
Yeah.
know, have to be thankful for what we've been given.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you also hit it right on the head. The older you get, the more wiser you have become. And it's allowed you to see the path you have taken. And I agree. We all are on similar paths. As we move closer to Jesus, we realize all the mistakes we've made in the past, whether they are working for money instead of working for His glory. It's amazing. It's almost like eye-opening. It's like, that's why I think they always said when you get older you get wiser, because you can look back on your life and say, oh, I was doing it wrong, but slowly I started doing it right, and now I'm moving closer and closer. And I think you're right. We all move closer to Jesus. That's the process that we're on, the road that we're on, I believe. Thank you. It's noteworthy that he didn't build a house, but an altar. talking about Abram. God promised Abram the land forever, yet he moved his tent and built an altar. He put the Lord first. Abram made worshiping the Lord a regular part of his life. He didn't seek the Lord only when things were difficult. He worshiped in good times too. Lot, on the other hand, lost everything. 2 angels warned Lot that Sodom was about to be destroyed. Lot's wife and sons-in-law died. Lot ran from the destruction and lived in a cave, Genesis 19. God used this season of unwelcome conflict and tension to move Lot away, leaving Abram to trust more fully in the promises of God. Abram was now in the position of the place of God's intended blessing. He eventually obeyed all of the Lord commanded him, and some 4,000 years after Abram, his offspring lives today in the same land we know as Israel. Consider Abram's devotion. After the Lord promised all the land, Abram's response was to build yet another altar to the Lord. Abram had faith in the Lord, and God worked out the rest. Very good point. When has God's outcome been more than you expected?
Every single time.
That's a good way to say it. He said every single time. Yep, every single time. Well, I got a confession to make. As most of you know, Schwann's is closing. Through a coincidence of one of my customers up in DeKalb, he told me about an opening down here in Peru. I called, they called the HR called me back. I had an informal interview, and I haven't told anyone, I don't think I've told anyone here yet, I've already been offered a job. So I thought that, I would go through this whole process of applying to 5 to 10 different companies and go through and do this and do this and do this, and all of a sudden, nope, here you go. I almost think it's like, if you just shut up and listen, it'll be given to you. And I'm not fighting over, like, how much do I make, and this and this and this and this. And everyone I've told, family, friends, are all like, well, you can do it. And I'm like, no, stop giving me bad advice. I'm not going to say, I just feel like this is what it's been intended for me to do. So boom, by Monday I have to tell them yes or no. So I've already, in my mind, my heart, I've already committed to saying, okay, now you've moved on. Now you have it, pardon?
Problem solved.
Problem solved. I don't have to worry about this or worry about that, or, worry, all the other things of transferring from one job to a next, and interviewing and doing this and writing a resume. And if you apply today, you have to do all this computer work stuff, which is, I haven't applied for a job in probably 30 years. I mean, it's been forever. So anyway, I just thought that was very interesting, that it's an example in my life. Yep. So, but I like the way you said, John, every single time things work out. Live it out. What actions will you take this week to today's study when you remember conflict with your family members? How can you apply the principles from Abram's experience with Lot? Choose one of the following applications. Go directly to God. Start by considering where you may have potential family conflict. Ask God for wisdom and guidance in this situation. It's the first thing I think we all need to do, because we all have conflict with someone, somewhere, some situation. Number 2, go directly to the source. When you're aware of a potential family conflict, and they're there, take the initiative by going directly to the person, seeking a peaceful solution. Avoid discussing the problem with others, as that can escalate the situation. How many of us have gone, and I know we all do this, you have an issue with someone, so what do? you go to someone else. And we just, some of us keep doing the wrong thing, but some of us have learned that that's not the best advice. You don't need to go to, because it turns into gossip. Because now you're talking about George because I had an issue with George at church, and now you're not even going to George. You're talking about it to these 3 other people, and that's what humans do, and we have to avoid that, obviously. That's not going to solve anything. Yeah, 2 people, you and the Lord, right? You know, let's not compound the situation by getting advice from 3 other people. Or the last one is go diplomatically. When you meet, don't be argumentative. That might be tough. Or respond with emotional expressions. That's also very tough to do. Go with a godly goal, restoration. That's what you have to keep that goal in mind. And thank you for coming out today. I appreciate it. Next week, here's a preview, Isaac and Rebecca. Do you remember the story? We're going to talk about favorites. And I listened to the podcast of the next one, and it was very interesting because they were talking about how parents can play favorites with their children and stuff. Oh, how bad could that be?
Talk about a can of worms.
Yeah. Talk about kids having issues as they grow older when parents favor some, over others.